Resident Evil as a series doesn't exactly have the best track record of letting us know what happened to some of its characters after they undergo some very life-changing traumas. What became of Ashley Graham after she was rescued from her kidnapping at the hands of the Los Illuminados in Spain? Where did Billy Coen go after he survived his ordeal with the Leech Queen and was given a new lease on life by Rebecca Chambers? Questions like these are quite common with many of the characters that we meet in later parts of the series. So when Zoe Baker survived her mold-infested nightmare in Louisiana, I think most people, myself included, probably just assumed that we'd never hear from her again. However, that hasn't ended up being the case. While she's not in the base story of Resident Evil 8 Village or anything like that, in the deluxe edition of the game, which gives us some additional content, we do actually learn what she's been up to since Louisiana, in a file written by her entitled The Baker Incident Report.
You're gonna be just fine.
From what can be gleaned off the document, after Zoe's run-in with Chris Redfield's Blue Umbrella unit, she was medically treated as best they could and placed into a quarantine facility to monitor any irregularities that may occur. Fortunately, no major complications arose during her isolation, and after being questioned by the BSAA about her time with E001, she would be released back into the world to live her life freely, given a new identity to protect her from the fallout of the Dulvey incident. However, that fallout was quite a bit different than one might have guessed, as the entire Baker situation had been chalked up in the media as a tragic natural gas leak. A gas leak that had killed the entire Baker family, including Zoe, as well as the cast of the paranormal internet series Sewer Gators. Coverage of the incident completely omitting the mold that had permeated the surrounding ecosystem, the Blue Umbrella agents that had flooded in to deal with the devastation, the dozen or so vagrants and tourists that the Bakers had abducted on behalf of Evelyn, and even neglected the crashed tanker that had washed up on the shores of the bayou. And though initially there were quite a few people from the community questioning the press's coverage of the events, eventually all the skepticism fell by the wayside, Dulvey, Louisiana becoming just another blip on the map of unfortunate things that happen in this world.
Everyone's forgotten about this already.
However, for Zoe, this cover-up around the events in Dulvey struck an obviously much more personal tone. At the hands of this biological weapon, her family had suffered deeply. They'd been twisted into barely recognizable butchers, puppets of flesh in Evelyn's grotesque, make-believe family. And even if the world had lost interest in the story, Zoe vowed that she would get to the bottom of it. Using contacts that she'd met during her time in quarantine with the BSAA, she began using their resources to piece together the tale of Evelyn and the cover-ups surrounding the events in Dulvey. Zoe learned of Evelyn's creation at the hands of a black market organization known as the Connections, learned that she'd been created to control a type of black mold called mutamycete, the same mold that had infested her family and taken root in her home. Unfortunately, however, details about this Connections organization were scarce even amongst the BSAA's data files, the only real detail of significance revolving around their founding. Apparently, the Connections had been founded by a man named Brandon Bailey, the former right-hand man of none other than Umbrella Pharmaceuticals co-founder Oswell E. Spencer. Bailey and Spencer had become estranged due to their misaligned views, and while Spencer continued on with his work for Umbrella, Bailey had split off to form this new black market powerhouse. With this, Zoe's research into the connections had hit a standstill, but the BSAA's documents did give new insight into the cover-up of the Baker family's fate. According to the files, long before Louisiana, the BSAA had acquired intel about Evelyn's creation and location. In line with their mission, they would dispatch a team to the facility creating her to destroy E001 before she could ever become a threat to public safety. Unfortunately, this mission would be a failure, and would be the catalyst for the connections deciding to send Evelyn overseas. Basically meaning that it was the BSAA's failures that allowed the atrocities in Dulvey to transpire.
We'll be together forever.
To avoid this travesty from being laid at their feet, the BSAA met with the Dulvey County Sheriff's Office to cover their involvement in the situation, feeding the lies to the media that it was simply a natural gas leak, a line which they fully embraced, even amid the slew of public grievances. These things being uncovered made Zoe question her saviors at the BSAA, but with no real recourse to hold them accountable, she simply bit her tongue, staying silent in the hopes that her BSAA resources could still be of use to her for her other goal of finding Ethan and Mia Winters. Since being taken into BSAA custody, Zoe had been wanting to thank Ethan and his wife Mia for telling them of her location, sending them back as aid before she could be lost to Evelyn's influence entirely. However, much like with her, the organization had sent the couple away with completely new identities, details of their whereabouts being a closely guarded secret amongst the organization, as they knew they were still in the connection's sights. The most that she could glean being a vague location in Eastern Europe, before her investigation would hit a brick wall for over 2 years. During this time, Zoe would go on to become a rookie reporter for a small-time newspaper in New Orleans, her nightmarish experience at her childhood home becoming a distant memory. Her life, for all intents and purposes, being that of any normal person living in the area. Her dream of reaching out to the Winters, a goal she'd accepted she may never get to reach. Until one day, a letter arrived at her apartment from none other than Mia. The letter thanked Zoe for her part in helping Ethan and Mia escape the Baker's home all that time ago, catching her up on some of the details of what their life had become since that fateful time, including the birth of their new daughter, Rosemary Winters. The notes ending with well wishes and hopes to meet again someday. The letter left Zoe in tears, happy to hear that the family that had helped her all those years ago was doing so well and flourishing wherever it was that the BSAA had relocated them.
There you go, sweetheart. Don't you worry. I'll be right downstairs. Daddy won't let those weird fairy tale monsters get you.
That's pretty much everything that we know about what happened to Zoe after the events of Resident Evil 7 BioHazard. She seems to be doing quite well as a reporter in New Orleans, her time with the BSAA and Evelyn having seemingly little to do with what she's up to these days. Unfortunately, she doesn't mention Joe Baker at all, which is a bit upsetting. I'd love to know what he's up to these days, but it does put a good cap on her story, assuming that this is the last that we hear from her. I think if Capcom were going to call Zoe back into the fray though, they definitely could. I could see her playing support to an older Rose Winters if they ever did a game focusing on her story. Zoe finding out about Ethan's demise and wanting to take revenge on the BSAA, who seems to have become steadily more corrupt after their botching of the initial mission to destroy Evelyn. But we don't really know where they're going with the story, so we'll see what happens. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the video, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.